Hello and welcome back to Voice of Geekdom. I'm your host Dan, and with me today is my co-host, the face that launched 1,000 ships, Helen, the clueless fangirl. And we're joined today by a very special guest. I'd like to extend a warm Voice of Geekdom welcome to Professor Corey Olsen, the president of Signum University, Tolkien scholar, Tolkien fandom luminary. Welcome, Corey, to the channel.
Hey, thanks for having me. Great to be with you guys.
Corey is a professor of Tolkien, a professor of medieval literature. Why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and just introduce yourself in a few words for people who may not know who you are?
Sure. Shame for those ones.
Sure. Well, my name is Corey Olsen. I'm the president of Signum University, and I started a Tolkien podcast, The Tolkien Professor, a long time ago now, 10 years ago. Back when it didn't help when people asked me what I did and I said I was a podcaster and they were like, a what? You know, so anyway, so I've been running the Tolkien podcast for a long time, and we started our program at Signum University, which is a master's degree program offering a concentration in Tolkien studies. One of the things that really motivated that was feedback from folks on my podcast, in my podcast listening audience, who were just really excited for the opportunity. A lot of people who had never really gotten the chance to study Tolkien in a serious academic environment before. So that was definitely one of the things that initially motivated me to start Signum, was to see people be able to get that opportunity. So that's certainly been a lot of fun to be seeing that happen too.
And full disclosure, I'm one of those people. So, I'm not a Signum student, but I do follow one of your classes, and that's how we met, and we were able to connect. So I actually wanted to extend a thank you to you for allowing me to be able to look at the Lord of the Rings in the way that I am now.
Oh goodness, yeah.
Because I'm going to get onto this in a moment, but I read the Lord of the Rings very, very young, as you did, and I've must have read it countless times. I lost count somewhere around 20 times.
Yes.
And I've never read it in this particular way before, because we read it very, very carefully, don't we, Corey?
Yeah, well, I've never read it in this way before either. I mean, it's been a revelation to me. It's been so exciting. So we're talking about, of course, my Exploring the Lord of the Rings podcast. And I go in for long-running podcast series. I mean, after you've been podcasting for more than 5 years, I sort of feel like I'm in it for the long haul here, So some people you used to ask me, like, back in year 2 or 3 of Tolkien podcasting, they'd say, what are you going to do when you have discussed all of Tolkien's works? I mean, they're not infinite, right? So sooner or later you're going to run out. What are you going to talk about then? And I'm like, I'm not worried. I'm really not. And of course we've turned out to have plenty of material. So Exploring the Lord of the Rings, it started off it was meant to be a long running series going through chapter by chapter through the Lord of the Rings. And I was thinking, we're going to go weekly, and I was thinking that we would probably do 2 or 3 classes per chapter or so. And we started off that way, the first 1 or 2 classes at least started off that way. But we soon, kind of began to go deeper and discuss deeper. And what I sort of realized fairly early on was, I don't know that I'm ever going to have a chance to do this again. And now, of course, it's definite that I'm never going to have a chance to do this again, as I won't live long enough to do this again. We've just decided, we're not going to leave anything on the table. We're going to go through, and we're discussing the Lord of the Rings, literally sentence by sentence, reading out every paragraph and discussing each paragraph and thinking about the issues that are raised, by that and drawing conclusions. We just did episode 167, episodes about 1.5 to 2 hours long. In our discussions. So 167 1.5 to 2 hour episodes, and we're still about 3/4 of the way through the Council of Elrond. So we're on pace for something like 500 or 600 episodes to get through the whole Lord of the Rings. and that will probably not be finished until sometime in the 2040s, maybe. I don't know. So I'm hoping to live long enough to finish the Lord of the Rings. If not, I'll bequeath the class to my heirs. But
you need a Christopher to your work.
Exactly. Yeah, I'll have to appoint a literary executor to take over the course. So,
of course, your son is also podcasting as well, right?
He
so
is.
He does Pokemon. He does a Pokemon stream right before exploring the Lord of the Rings. There does seem to be a natural Christopher in waiting there.
Well, we'll see. He's he's actually, so he's 12 and he's not yet read the Lord of the Rings. Ironically, he's read the Silmarillion, but he's not read the Lord of the Rings.
Wow, okay.
I love him already.
yeah. We did the audiobook version of the Silmarillion because he was very interested in it, but we haven't done the Lord of the Rings yet. Anyway, we'll see. So he has some brushing up on his Tolkien legendarium to do before he's ready to take over, but he's got time.
So I've heard you say before in previous interviews that you came to Tolkien quite early in life.
Yes.
I think I've heard you say age 8.
8, that's right.
First time you read The Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
Mine was
6.
Mine was
no, I'm kidding.
Sorry, Helen. Did you have something to add? I've heard you say before that you were very young. I was very young too. I read The Lord of the Rings for the first time at 8, I think, as well. 7 or 8, I think. I've always thought with Tolkien, it seems to be the case that when you come to it early in life, it seems to have a way of staying with you. I think there's a Tom Shippey quote where he says something like this, and it seems to be something that just sort of sticks with you. Why is that, do you think?
It's a really good question. I mean, first of all, the first thing that I would say is that, early exposure, of course, doesn't guarantee that you're going to stick with it, right? I mean, there are a lot of people who try to read Tolkien early, or worse, try to read Tolkien with their kids when their kids are really young and their kids aren't really into it, and it's really hard. So I often get asked that question, like on Twitter, people often ask me the question, like, at what age would you recommend I try to, read Tolkien with my kids for the first time? And it's a really hard question to answer because it varies wildly based on the kid. I mean, there's some kids who are all about it, when they're quite young, especially if they're reading it with their parents. And I've known many people who have had the Lord of the Rings read to them at age 6 or something like that, by their parents. And it's gone really, really well and they've loved it. And I've known others who have, tried and really not been into it or able to get into it when they're significantly older than that. So it's really hard to say. There's no real rule about that. But for those who do read it and those who do get into it, I think actually, to me, this seems to me that the phenomenon you were just describing about how it kind of stays with people over their lives seems to me a connected to a larger pattern that I would point to in Tolkien fandom in general. One of the things that's very striking to me, very noticeable about Tolkien fandom that I've seen is that it seems to me there's a particular quality that is common among diehard Tolkien fans, and that is most Tolkien fans. I mean, it's not that they don't have favorite characters, because they do, and it's not that they don't love the story, because they do, but they have a different. Like most diehard Tolkien fans are in love first and foremost with Middle-earth itself, like with Tolkien's world, and other stuff, the favorite characters or favorite parts of the story or something like that are almost really, really secondary. It's like the world that they fall in love with. And I think that's why that's the explanation for the phenomenon that you see, that when kids enter into that world and really fall in love with it, they fall in love with it sticks with them because they're immersed in it. It's a different kind of imaginative experience, the way that you kind of lose yourself in Middle-earth, the kind of relationship that you establish with Middle-earth. And the thing that's ironic is that I think it also is connected with one of the reasons why the Lord of the Rings is so hard for some people to get into. There are lots of people, I'm sure you've all met people who have picked up the Lord of the Rings and are like, I can't even read this. I can't even get through it. And normally they say that because they're, and then they'll be like, oh, his style is awful. And what they usually mean by that is there's so much bloody landscape description. Like, oh, my page after page, I don't need to know. I don't care about the landscape. And honestly, I feel like that's almost like sort of self-selecting. When I hear people talking like that, I'm just like, well, I think Tolkien is not for you. Then you're not gonna love it if you don't.
The landscape is almost a key character, isn't it?
It really is. It really is. It's the most important character.
I think the songs is also very off-putting for a lot of people. And
yes. Yeah, exactly. The random songs that now but those at least you can moderate that by just skipping them. Right, which is what so many people do. But the landscape descriptions, just like when is, and sometimes they'll start doing that. They'll be like, okay, blah, 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 the landscape, the mountains in the distance, whatever, what happens next. But again, people who are kind of interested in consuming stories on that level are just not interested in undertaking the kind of imaginative engagement that Tolkien is going for. And that's fine. But if you are, you're in, right? You're in, and Middle-earth sticks with you, and certainly does, I think, much more so when you do that as a child. I mean, there's so many things in my life that I think are pretty readily traceable back to Tolkien reading, whether it's like...
We were talking about one recently, actually. It was a linguistic thing, wasn't it?
Exactly.
In exploring Lord of the Rings, which was, I think it was a Britishism.
Exactly. That there are several turns of phrase or particular vocabulary words or things that I picked up from the Lord of the Rings and didn't realize were weird, because of course Tolkien uses a lot of archaic language, which I didn't realize was archaic, because to me, like, the Lord of the Rings was like my standard of what was normal, right? So I didn't even realize that it was weird.
So you thought British people talked like that?
Well, I thought everybody talked. I talked like that, so I thought everybody talked like that.
It must have been very popular in high school, Corey.
oh man, you can't even imagine. Well, and of course, the particularly bizarre thing is that when I was 8, when I first read The Lord of the Rings, I was living in rural West Virginia, which is, neither of you are in America. I don't know if I doubt you've ever been to West Virginia. It is the most, one of the most rural of, I mean, it's a bizarre kind of, it's a lovely state to live in as a child, but it was, but there weren't many people who lived around me who talked like Tolkien, that's for sure. Sharply different from the local dialect. Let me just put it that way.
Sure.
But what I found super interesting, to get back to what both of you said, the rereading and early on reading and rereading. I just did a podcast with a friend of mine about Lewis and Tolkien, and the thing is, I love, because you said people fall in love with the world, and that is definitely true. And I think very often you don't know, should I root for Frodo now? Should I now root for Aragorn? Should I root for
Right.
Boromir? I mean, you're a sicko if you do that, but whatever. And, like these things. And the world, I love the world of Narnia as well, right? But I would never go back to these books and read them every year, or every second year, like I do Lord of the Rings. And that is because yes, the world is amazing. Lewis is a really good, I think, author-wise, just the writing style, I prefer Lewis, right?
And Lewis's prose style is gorgeous. I mean, it really is.
Yeah, and I studied literature, so I really appreciate that. But the world is, as a kid, when I first read the Narnia books, I was like, wow, this is amazing. I'm blown away. And the same for Lord of the Rings, but it's so much deeper, and it's not the religious aspects in your face, boom, stuff that Lewis does to us. And Tolkien doesn't want to convert me as a Christian and stuff like that, So you understand that the more you read it and the more often you read it. And I find it so interesting that I really go back to these books and reread them. And I have so many books on my shelf I want to read, actually.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
he's one of the authors that can do that, and there are not many.
Absolutely. I agree. And, I think it's interesting when you look at the contrast there, and you're right. Your experience is what you described is a lot of people have that same kind of experience, right? I think Lewis actually, in some ways, he succeeds better as specifically a writer for children. I wouldn't say he succeeds better than Tolkien did in The Hobbit, right? But again, he wasn't trying to write specifically for children in The Lord of the Rings anymore at all, right? But which is again another reason why a lot of modern people, right, are like, well, they're fantasies, so they're for kids. So, and it's like, careful, guys, careful. If you're Tolkien fans, be careful about giving The Lord of the Rings to your kids too young, because it's not designed for kids. It's not really for kids. I mean, it's not to say it's inappropriate necessarily, but again, you just have to be cautious. But Lewis did a really good job. I mean, you can tell by how many kids read Narnia, and he does a wonderful job of drawing kids in and creating this really delightful world that children can invest in. And I still love the Narnia books as an adult, and I reread them less frequently, like you, than I do. But I do reread them, and I do find them really interesting. But it doesn't. It's nothing like the same kind of permanent appeal, right? Yeah. There's So if Lewis was more successful in those, in reaching directly to kids and appealing to kids, certainly than The Lord of the Rings, again, which doesn't attempt to do it. The Lord of the Rings is really very much more sort of permanent.
Yeah. No, but it's interesting, and this is just on rereads. I understood that the actual hero is not just one person, and it's not Sam. Yes, Sam is one of, but in the beginning, I was like, if somebody would have asked me, age 10, I think I was 10 or 11 when I read it. And if somebody would have asked me, I said, oh, but the Prince Aragorn should be the hero, right? He's the prince, so he's the protagonist. What is happening here? So I find all these things he does to the story and types he invents, kind of, I find that so cool and so fascinating, and I don't know any other author who ever gave me that, and I've read a lot. You can't see my library here, but it's
right. Yeah, no, I agree. That's a really interesting point too. And there's so many ways in which The Lord of the Rings is really unconventional from a storytelling perspective, right? It just doesn't play by the rules, almost any of the rules of modern literature. And that's one of them, right? Like, you're supposed to have like a character you can relate to, like, the character you're connecting with, a clear protagonist of the story. The Lord of the Rings doesn't have that. You're absolutely right. And that's the way that it resists that. Of course, the effect of it is wonderful because it enables you to connect all over the place, and almost all of the characters. I mean, yes, of course. Obviously, I think that Sam is the most important hero of the book, but you're right. It's not like he's the central protagonist in any sense, right? And obviously, Frodo is very heroic, and Aragorn is very heroic in his own way. Merry and Pippin become heroic in their own ways. I mean, everyone. I mean, Faramir emerges, and Eowyn, all these other people, right? Whom you meet and who all participate in this, and it does make for a very remarkable readerly experience. And in some ways, I wonder if that's another thing that helps The Lord of the Rings to be so kind of stable, right? So easy to return to, because as you grow and change over the course of your life, you can connect with and relate to different characters. You can think about things from different perspectives. You can appreciate new things.
That's one thing that's come up quite often in exploring Lord of the Rings, actually, is when we've been looking at the narrative, we've been quite often looking at the narrative from the perspective of who was actually writing this, because of course you've got the kind of conceit or the fictional frame of the main characters being the writers of the story, and this being like a memoir, essentially. Right. And that's something that we've been looking at closely, is trying to figure out who said what and who added which emendation to the text. Right. Which is something that you don't necessarily look at for the first time reading it, but it gives it that rereadability.
Oh yeah, I mean, those kinds of layers that Tolkien gives to it, the ways in which the kind of metatextual frame, as you were describing, and all those things. There are so many different, and then of course then you read the appendices, which I didn't do when I was a kid at first. I was just like, and there's a bunch of stuff at the back, but then I don't remember exactly how old I was when I first read the appendices, but when I got to the end of the story, when I was like 8, I immediately went back and started at the beginning again. So I can't remember exactly how old I was when I actually read the appendices. But and even then, I'm pretty sure I read Appendix A, which of course has lots of stories in it, right? And I got to the end of Appendix A, and then I get to Appendix B, which is the Tale of Years. And I was like, okay, but pretty quickly we got to like the family trees and the calendars and stuff. And I'm like, okay, yeah, whatever. It's just like then a bunch of extra stuff. So I stopped reading again. So there were, kind of like waves that I went through, that material. But anyway, the point is, again, there's all this new stuff to discover, right? As not only thinking about the story from different perspectives and all this stuff like we've been talking about, but then, Dan, as you were talking about the way in which we, begin to we see the history behind the story, right? And we think about it in connection with the history. And then we see, the larger framework, like the larger linguistic and textual framework, that he provides, and the metatextual frame, and everything. There's so many different levels to think on it, which again, just especially once you're already hooked into loving Middle Earth, to begin to be able to like settle down and live there. Like I can learn the language, I can learn the calendar, I can all of these things, which you just never usually get. So yeah,
some parts are missing, but here you literally could live there 24 hours.
Right.
Yeah, no, you could. Yeah,
absolutely.
And what I always found so interesting, and I don't know, boys, if you had the same response to that. Like for me, I was always like, oh, wow, all the girls in the story, and then I read the Silmarillion, and I was like, okay, I'm fine. I'm good. But the thing is, like Éowyn, I really like the character. And in the beginning, I understood a character like Éowyn because I was a young girl when I first read it, right? And then I grew, and I'm a woman now and everything. And I understand her arc now completely different. Like, in the beginning, I was like, oh my God, like Tolkien literally wants her to go back to be like a housewife, right? Is that her arc? That's
right.
not, I was like 18 and like, no, that's not okay. She should be a warrior. She should have, but why does she choose this? And now I understand it, right? I want to have children now and all that. I completely get her now in a different way. And that is so beautiful. And he does that with so many characters. And this is, again, to come back, why we go back to these stories and characters.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And there's so much richness to that. I mean, that storyline is something I've heard from many people who basically still read the Éowyn story exactly like you were describing. That's a very understandable first reaction to it, right? Because it does seem like at first, it does seem like she's saying like, well, but fortunately now I can get married and become a housewife. So it's okay. I don't have to be a warrior anymore. And it's totally understandable to read, but that's not what she says, right? And when you look at it, especially in the context of Faramir and what Faramir says, right? When it becomes clear the warrior culture that she was invested in, right? She was becoming a warrior in order to because she wanted death, right? That was what it meant to her to be a warrior, was that it was a way to die and to gain honor. And it was the only way she felt, in her mind. But then to be able to, when she realizes, the breakthrough that she has is there is more that is honorable than fighting. Right. It is honorable to be a healer. It is honorable to be a gardener. It is honorable to, to celebrate life in peace. And that can be okay, too. It's a broadening of her. It's not a narrowing of her perspective. I've got to relegate myself to a traditionally female role. Her role, the role that she takes for herself, isn't any more traditionally female than Elrond's role. It's that, to be a healer and the keeper of the keeper of a house of healing and stuff. Of course, Aragorn Aragorn himself establishes his kingship by being a healer rather than a warrior, right? Or by being both, at least.
Yeah.
Anyway, but so this is just where, again, there's so much that, and this is why, again, some people who don't know Tolkien, right, would kind of view this sort of repetitive reading, like we've all been confessing to be just this sort of obsessive thing, right? Like, just like, why do you go over and over the same story again and again? There really is so much richness to it. There's so much. I mean, I've lost track of how many times I've read it too. And I am learning new things every single week in exploring the Lord of the Rings, like every week in every paragraph which means in every paragraph of the Lord of the Rings, I'm finding things that I'd never noticed before, and realizing things, having my eyes open to things that I've never seen. And, when you have that to me, that is the clearest indicator of a work of real genius, of a literary, like that's what literary greatness is. And I'm not saying that Tolkien is unique in that. There are many wonderful works of literary genius where you can have that same experience, where you can go back and you can reread whatever, again, there are many and people have different tastes in these things. But I mean, certainly to me, that's what makes a great, so when people will ask questions like, do you really think that Tolkien is like worthy of literary study? Should it be in the canon? Is it one of like the, yes, I mean, by every test that, that I can apply, it absolutely does. I've never, I have a PhD. I studied a lot of literature, and I have never found another work of literature that offers more. I mean, there are others that I would put on par with it, but I mean, I find the study of Chaucer as rewarding as I find the study of Tolkien, for instance, but not more. I mean, there are other authors that are better at some things than Tolkien is, but he's better than them at other things, so, it's all good.
And the average people agree with you, because you literally, I'm a big Folio Society. I brought Dan to Folio Society. I love all the editions. Like, seriously, I leave all my money there. They always have these annual, or like, I think every 10 years, they ask what is the most influential book. And many publishers and many, newspapers or whatever. Who's always winning? It's literally year after year after year since the 60s. It's Lord of the Rings, and doesn't it tell us something? So,
and there's it's personally, I find it very tiresome. There's this trend that began in the early 20th century. This trend which identified quality, like, you can tell, like, the primary test, essentially, no one ever articulated this. Very few people ever actually said this straight out. But when you really examine the kinds of claims that were made for, what counts as a literary masterpiece, what it generally boils down to is a great work means one that is hard to understand and that therefore most people in the general public won't like or get. Right. Like that was like a prerequisite for greatness. If it's easy to, so like, Joyce's Ulysses, high on the scale, right? Because nobody understands it. So I'm not dissing it.
That's
Joyce
exactly
is great.
The example that I was just thinking of. Because I tried to read Ulysses, and I need punctuation. I'm sorry.
Absolutely. And that's the one, like, if you repeat Tom Shippey's claim, right, that the Lord of the Rings is, that Tolkien is the author of the 20th century, right? I mean, like, you'll get like Joyce people like coming at you, with fists. I mean, like, Joyce people there's nobody within academia. I mean, my experience in mainstream, English departments and stuff, literature circles, it's the Joyceans more than anybody else who like breathe fire when you start talking about Tolkien. But anyway, like, again, and I'm not going to diss him. Joyce was awesome. Joyce's works are really, really good. They are in fact great, but it's not their difficulty that makes them great. And certainly, more importantly, if a work is popular, if many people enjoy and love a work, that does not disqualify it from being great. And people treat it like it does. Like that's a standard. Like if it's popular, obviously it's not great. That is stupid. Like that is a stupid idea.
Yeah.
And it really stems back from the particular subspecies of literary snobbery that was really popular in the early 20th century, like at the time of Joyce, basically.
Oh my God, like
fault,
literally in Germany, we have this, Goethe-Nietzsche discussion, which is exactly the same. Like, oh yeah, I study literature and like, oh, you don't understand Nietzsche? I'm like, no, not really. But I love Goethe. And they're like so snobby about, like, seriously, oh, you don't understand Nietzsche? Okay, whatever.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, it's, and it's hard, but I find that like when you actually confront that in the light, because most people just don't think about it that way. But I mean, it's really, there was a C.S. Lewis essay that really stimulated my thinking on this, where he was talking about good books and bad books and sort of what and he did a sort of a thorough examination of this, thinking about, like books that people apologize for reading. They're like, well, it's not really good literature, but I really like this book anyway, right? Like, what kind of books do you apologize for, and what do you not? What are you proud of reading? Or like, when you've got like school children, like, teenagers and stuff, which books you say like, oh, these are like excellent works of literature that you should aspire to read. And these are like indulgences, and these are bad books, not in the sense of, they're just, lowbrow books. And his conclusion was it comes down to difficulty. It's like, are they hard to read? If so, they're good. If not, they're bad. And that's just like, it's nonsensical. It's utterly nonsensical.
So we talked a little bit about the world building of Tolkien and how deep and expansive it is. The main reason for that, I would say, is what Tolkien called the mythology, which was a sort of process that he started very early in life and never finished, of revising this world and building it out and fleshing it out, and then redrafting it, and then losing interest in doing something else for a little while, and then coming back to it again. And he always came back to it, and we now call that the Silmarillion, of course.
Right.
So
my favorite book, by the way.
Probably mine as well, I think. For that reason, for the fact that it created the world and it created that sort of canvas for him to paint the Lord of the Rings on top of.
Yes.
So my question, well, I should say, I mean, I don't know if you've watched any of my content, but what I've been doing on my channel is going through the Silmarillion at the blistering pace of one chapter per 20-minute video.
Whew.
Or roughly anyway. I mean, some of the longer chapters I've had to split up, but my goal in my channel, at least when I launched it, was to try to bring that text to people and make it accessible to a first-time reader audience.
Or to people who gave up on the Silmarillion. There are plenty of them out there.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, people that read it for the first time and gave up, or the second time.
I wanted to give up after Aino Lindale. I mean, I was like, what is this?
If I could have made one single very simple suggestion to Christopher Tolkien that I think would have made a big difference, put the Valaquenta at the end. Put the Valaquenta at the end. How many people get to that part and they're like, oh my goodness, is there even a story in this book at all? Right.
Yeah.
Now, like the Aino Lindale, like the Aino Lindale is challenging, but that has to come first, right? But if you went straight from the Aino Lindale into the Quenta Silmarillion proper, so that there was like some sense of narrative that went all the way through, but I think, based on just, I haven't done official, I haven't collected a formal data on this, but from conversations I've had with people, a large percentage of folks peter out in the Valaquenta, despairing of ever getting to stories, basically.
And you think this is a very Christian? Is this like Genesis? Is this a Bible retelling?
Yes, it sounds like the Bible. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think the Valaquenta would have worked better as a kind of appendix, essentially. Like, read more about the Valar in the Valaquenta.
I'm carrying you here.
Yeah, exactly. So that's, but yeah, it's. But anyway, I'm sorry, I interrupted. You were talking about the Silmarillion there.
No, not at all. I mean, I was going to ask you what advice you would give to first-time readers My viewers, in other words.
Yeah, well, skip the Valaquenta is the first one. But the biggest thing I always say to Silmarillion readers, a lot of people who go to like a lot of Tolkien fans, people who love the Lord of the Rings, and so the first thing that gets in the way of first-time readers of the Silmarillion is they don't know what they're getting into, right? I know that's why I failed. The first time I tried to read the Silmarillion, I didn't discover it till I was like 14. I had no guidance, by the way. Like nobody in my family read fantasy or anything like that. I was like discovering everything completely on my own. So it was only when I happened across it in like the library and I was like, what? There's another book by Tolkien? Holy cow. And so, and when I went to it, what I wanted was more Lord of the Rings, right? I wanted like, a sequel or a prequel or something. I wanted more Lord of the Rings story. I got like, I'm sure I did not get past the Valaquenta the first time. And I'm like, this is not more Lord of the Rings. And I respectfully, I mean, it was a Tolkien book, so I respectfully put it aside, but I could not get into it at that age. So that's one thing. So the first thing that I think puts people off is just not knowing what to expect. And so not knowing how to understand what they're getting. Right. So if you know, okay, these are the legends of the elder days, right? And so it's going to start with an account of creation, and then it's going to tell you some about the powers and the gods, and then you're going to begin the story of the ancient world. If you know what to expect, you're in a much better place. But the number, so if you will get over that hurdle, right? Again, if you're a Lord of the Rings reader and you've heard about the Silmarillion and you know it's hard to read, and you go back and you sit, still a lot of people who do that still fail. And I think the number one reason for them failing, or rather the primary advice, let me put it that way, that I have to people who are doing that, don't try to remember all the names. Don't try. Like all the F names, exactly.
Yeah. We joke around about the F family, don't we? When we talk about the Noldor.
Or as Michael Drought says, all those effing elves. Yes. So there's so many people who are just like they try to take notes, right? They're trying to like I've got to trying to memorize it like there's going to be a quiz later, which of course gets really hard when he goes into one of those passages where he starts giving like these people also known as the blam 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 blam, and he gives all of these different synonyms, and you're like, do I have to know all this? No, you don't have to know all this. Like just roll with it. So my main advice, just roll with it. Don't try to remember all the names. A large number of the names of people that you'll never meet again. It's fine. They will become a mere trivia question, which once you've read the Silmarillion 3 or 4 times, maybe you'll remember them, but you don't need to. Of the people whose names begin with F, there are a very few of them that you need to remember, and you'll get stories about them, so, but when you get to, things like I think the second largest barrier point, right? The Valaquenta, I think, is the first one. The second major barrier point is of the princes of the Eldalier and of Beleriand and its realms, right? Both of those, are like lots of lists, lots of lists of names of people, lots of lists of names of places and descriptions of, where they lie on the map and stuff like that. And again, a lot of people are like, okay, I'm supposed. Oh, how can I know? How can I remember all this stuff? Just roll with it, right? Just let it roll over you. Get the experience of sort of like zooming over the map, and you'll hear the names. Some of these names you'll hear later, and if you want to, you can go back and look them up. But most of them are never going to come up again, and it's fine. Just roll with it. There's not going to be a quiz. No one's going to test you on all the names, and just enjoy the stories, right? Just, persevere until you get to the stories again. Those other chapters are important, and there's some really cool stuff embedded, in like of Beleriand and its realms. But for a first time reader, so not important. Better to skip it, honestly. Better to skip that chapter and move on, to the story like leading up to the Dagor Bragollach, and then the Near Ninth Arnoediad, and then the story of and the story of Beren Lúthien, and the story of Tuor and Turambar. I mean, once you get there, you're fine. Like if you make it to Beren and Lúthien, you'll make it. To the end of the Silmarillion.
Well, I actually did roughly what you did the first time through when I got to the Valaquenta, and I thought, what is this? What is this list of characters that I don't understand who they are. I don't have any context to put them in yet.
Yes.
And then I skipped to Beren and Lúthien because I already kind of thought I knew that story a little bit from the Lord of the Rings.
Right.
I loved Beren and Lúthien, and then put the book down and didn't touch it again for a couple of years.
Well, so you got more good out of it than I did for my first reading. That's good.
But the thing is, you're so taking like what Corey said. You expect a prequel to Lord of the Rings, and you get religion, and there is no religion in Lord of the Rings, right? Not in your face religion. Yes, there is, resurrection and all that, and friendship, and yes, but it's not like the Bible, and you're like, what is it? Did he become a priest? What happened?
And of course, like the stories in the Silmarillion are the same, right? They're not. There's no religion in those either. No. Famously, right? The only instance of religious observance anywhere in the Middle Earth writings is in Numenor, right? That's Numenor, Parma. And that's and you have to look pretty hard to find that one, right? Yeah. But I agree. At the beginning, when it's all the lists of gods and goddesses, and it feels in that way, in exactly the way that you're describing, Helen. It feels alien, right? Not just different, but in that way almost alien from the Lord of the Rings. Like, is this even the same world? I mean, I remember in the Valaquenta, like my attention was briefly sort of snared by coming across Elbereth. Right, I'm like, okay, all right, I know that name. Right, okay, all right. Now that's so like, okay, I'm getting some interesting backstory there, but unfortunately, she's near the beginning of the Valaquenta, and then I'm like, whoa, okay, that's a lot. So, yeah.
And what's your favorite part of this? Because my channel is dedicated mainly at the moment. So I do something similar like Dan, but I do more like these things we do here. So I invite a guest, very often Dan, and we talk about one topic like Tolkien and religion, Tolkien and women, or Feanor. Is he really evil? Did he really go after to revenge his father, or did he want the Silmarils back? Like that stuff. So I try to be a bit philosophical, but I do like lore videos. We YouTuber call them lore videos, and I focus on Numenor. And I must say, it's literally, I just wanted to do one video about the kings and queens of Numenor, just to explain 35, yes, some were good, some were evil. It became really bad in the end,
right,
and stuff like that. And then I think I'm now on video 8 or something, like really 30-minute videos, and it takes me like a week to write them. It's like a proper book, and I love Numenor. So what's your favorite part? Because there's so many, not for nothing did we get 3 books. Like we get the Fall of Gondolin, like the 3 great tales. So what do you love?
I really do love the Beren and Lúthien story. That's possibly my favorite.
We love fairy tales.
Yeah, it's really hard to choose. One of the reasons that the Beren and Lúthien story always stood out to me is that it's the only story in the whole Silmarillion that has anything like a happy ending. Right now, I say like it because, of course, the frame of it, like the first paragraph of the chapter in the published Silmarillion, right, talks about the sad ending, right, and how they lost her whom they loved. So I'm all prepared for tragedy at the end, right? But instead of getting tragedy like the Tuor and Turambar story, or tragedy,
you're like is this Turin all over again?
Exactly right. Yeah, no, yes, it's sad, but it's sad from the Elvish perspective. It's not sad from Lúthien's perspective, right? And even the way in which the story, which has a happy ending from the point of view of the protagonists of the story, from Beren and Lúthien's point of view, the way in which the narrative frame of that story kind of challenges you as a reader to think about how, from the outside perspective, like from outside of the sort of world that Beren and Lúthien live with each other, right? Especially in their like retirement home in Osirian, right? Outside that, it's a tragedy, right? To everybody else, they feel like it's a tragedy, although a tragedy from which great inspiration was drawn, right? A triumphant tragedy, which changed, the minds and views of all of the rest of the elves, seeing that Morgoth was not unassailable and all that stuff. And of course there are many elements of the Beren and Lúthien story itself that I really, really liked. So yeah, that's probably my favorite. I mean, it's hard for me to resist that. I did always really love Gondolin and the concept of Gondolin.
I want to live in Gondolin.
Oh my goodness, yeah. And the Tuor story.
And I think R.R. Martin was really influenced by the fall of Gondolin. With the houses. That's what I want to actually learn more about, but sadly we will probably never get that about the house, about the sigils and the color. I would love that. I would love to know more. How did it look? How was? Oh God!
Absolutely. No, there's no. I've said this many times, but the greatest tragedy, in my opinion, of Tolkien's literary career. There are lots of things he didn't finish. There are lots of things that he wanted to do and didn't do. The greatest tragedy of his literary career was not finishing his rewriting of the Gondolin story that the one that's begun in Unfinished Tales and breaks off when Tuor arrives. If there is one thing that I wish that Tolkien had finished, it's that. It's that more than anything else.
One of the first ones, right? So it's literally one of his first.
Right, and for that reason, I always felt long before I knew anything about the Silmarillion text or anything, I always felt that the fall of Gondolin's story in the published Silmarillion was like disappointing. Like it was like there's clearly so much more, right? There needs to be so much more. It's only a teaser of a story, and I loved it for that. I mean, I loved the concept of the story that it was, and I love the character of Tuor. Tuor may be my favorite. Like, if I had to choose a favorite Silmarillion character, like whom I would most like to be, Tuor and Huan are probably my two favorite Silmarillion characters in that way.
And Idril, I mean, how
Idril,
clever was she?
Absolutely.
Listen to women. Nobody's listening to the women in these stories.
One of the whole subtext of the entire Silmarillion, right? Yeah, ignore the women at your peril.
Listen to Melvin.
We were just talking about this in Exploring Lord of the Rings recently, and it also came up in a podcast with Helen recently. So I've had this on the mind quite a lot recently.
Absolutely.
Women being the smartest people in the Silmarillion, generally speaking, but being left out of the decision-making process. Far too often.
Yeah. And that's something. This came from so in my Mythgard Academy series, I've been doing discussions, chapter by chapter discussions, not paragraph by paragraph, but chapter by chapter discussions of the history of Middle Earth for several years now.
I love these ones. I finished those ones of yours.
Oh, man, it's been so great. I've been so excited. I've learned so much from doing those things. We just finished Morgoth's Ring, and in Morgoth's Ring, one of the things that I found really, really striking there, because so in Morgoth's Ring, the thing that's really interesting about that is it's the volume of Middle-earth in which Christopher begins to cover the revisions of the Silmarillion that Tolkien did after writing The Lord of the Rings. So you really see how does The Lord of the Rings influence Tolkien's concepts, right? How is he starting to change this stuff to make it fit The Lord of the Rings? Really, really fascinating to see that happening all over the place. But one of the trends that was very noticeable, I felt, when we were discussing our way through Morgoth's Ring, he was going out of his time, and again, he was going way out of his way to include more female characters. Now, a lot of those revisions that he did, a lot of those additions that he made didn't get put in by Christopher when he revised them because they're in texts that were unfinished, and Christopher only wanted to do presentable, completed texts that his father wrote.
Yeah, he was very conservative with that, wasn't he?
Very, very much.
The Miriel storyline in Morgoth's Ring, I think, would have been a huge improvement because that kind of plot element in the published Silmarillion is kind of a stub, isn't it? We just get kind of she gave up and died, and that was that.
Absolutely. There's so much more to the Miriel story. Absolutely. But even even when he doesn't invent stories, like the way that he went on to talk about Fingolfin and Finarfin had sisters that we never know about. If you just read the published Silmarillion, you'd never know that. Fingolfin had other daughters. I mean, it's just like there's he and those were all additions. Those are all changes that he made as if he realized in revising. Yeah, like this is an almost entirely masculine cast with very few, with like the exception of Arathel and Lúthien, and very small. But even Galadriel wasn't in their original.
I know. This is what we were, but it was one of his last deeds.
Yeah, exactly.
Before he died, he gave Galadriel. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, and Christopher does, because he wanted to. That's one of the, as you say, Dan. He was very conservative. Christopher was very conservative, but of course, one of the exceptions that he made were in things which directly related to the Lord of the Rings, right? Going back and adding some of the Gandalf material with the reference to Aloran in the Valaquenta, going back and adding the Galadriel references. Her role, the couple paragraphs that mention her in the Quenta Silmarillion, but like those paragraphs are contemporaneous with a bunch of other things that he wrote about other female characters that Christopher didn't add in because they're not directly related to the Lord of the Rings. But anyway, I found it really interesting that Tolkien himself seemed to be like conscious, right, of the lack, right, the need for more, to not to just like give women more representation as if he were, just like, being sort of tokenist about it, but rather he was, he seemed to recognize that there needed to, to sort of to tell the fuller story, which included things like wives and daughters, and not just the lists of, the men in the genealogy, as if it were like, an Old Testament genealogy or something like that.
But look at the time he did that, and the time, the actual timeline, 70s, like, flower power, and like all that 70s, 80s, it was a different time than when he started that. And he probably got a lot of letters.
Well,
but what
he also had? A grown daughter is also what he had at that time, right? Yeah. Which he did not have. But I mean, he had a wife when he wrote the stories originally. True. But I actually think that very likely Priscilla's growing up is one of the things that very likely changed. That's just a guess on my part.
How could it not?
And
really,
seeing how the world changed, and feminism and all that. Yeah. Cool. So Beren and Lúthien was very, very.
I think so.
Yeah.
Beren and I mean, it's hard. Well, also, of course, the other reason that I have to give a leaning towards Beren and Lúthien, Huan is one of my very favorite characters in the Silmarillion. So
you're a dog man then?
Well, like if there's one thing, it's I won't emphasize this in the presence of Queen Beruthiel, but there's a pretty clear. Tolkien was not a cat person. That's pretty clear, right?
I mean, name my next cat Tevildo. Okay.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, of course, the Book of Lost Tales version of the Tale of Tinuviel is very explicitly like dogs are good and cats are evil.
I know.
But it's fine. It's fine. I don't want to. But yeah, no. I love Huan. I mean, there was so much that I just found not only just very endearing about the character of Huan, his faithfulness and his loyalty, and not just because he's not loyal in the way that a dog is loyal. Like the way. I mean. Of course, okay, yes, he is. What I mean is he's not only loyal in the way that a dog is loyal, right? Because if he were, he would have stuck with Celegorm throughout his life, right? Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the old joke, right? That like there's nobody so bad that like, his dog won't love him, right? I mean, it's like your dog sticks with you no matter how much of a jerk you are to everybody else. But not Huan, right? So that combination of Huan taking a stand, right, and being like, no,
moral compass.
Yeah, the moral stand that Huan takes, and not only like the way that he even eventually turns against Celegorm and Curufin, but you can feel what a big deal it is, right? He doesn't want to do that. He leaves Celegorm. But it's only when he is actually compelled, right? When that he actually turns against them. but then, and from then, the love and loyalty, which again is clearly based in his case on judgment, right? I mean, not merely on blind loyalty. And then you add to that the mythic power of that element of him speaking 3 times, right? That he was destined 3 times to speak with words. And there's so many things. I never had words for this, I didn't really understand myth as Tolkien discusses myth when I was a kid. Like that whole concept. I used the word myth in the same way that most people use myth nowadays, which is meaning a story some people believe but isn't really true. Like that's the definition of myth as most people use it. But when I came to read on fairy stories and things like that, and we're Tolkien talking about myth and the power of myth, and Lewis talking about myth and the power of myth as well, in some of his essays, I began to really see, that's the stuff that really had such a profound effect on me as a kid. There were so many elements that I didn't understand. I could never explain to anybody what I liked about them, right? Because small things, like for instance, I was always deeply moved in ways that I couldn't understand by the story of the old man who gave the warning to Brago at the Paths of the Dead, right? Yeah. To Brago and Balder, right? And who sits there, he delivers his warning and then drops dead in that hour, right? And I was like, that, like the warning and then the immediate death of the guy who gave the warning. I mean, I didn't really get it. It's not like I'm like, oh, this is an awesome story. You should. I mean, because it wasn't awesome in the same way that other stories or even other elements of that story. I also loved the Battle of Helm's Deep because I found it exciting and fun. But think moments like that in the Lord of the, and there's so many of them, these which have this mythic weight to them. Like there's something deeper there that I don't understand, but which really affects me in some way that I can't identify. Anyway, Huan has that in spades, that same kind of element. And so, combine all those things. I was a sucker for dog stories anyway. That was certainly another big element of my loving the Beren and Lúthien story.
And for me, the Beren and Lúthien, I grew up reading the Grimm's fairy tales. That's what my mom, when I was a little, very German, but this is what every German kid learn. Right. And they are actually, Disney completely corrupted these stories, by the way, people. So for every American, I'm very sorry, our fairy tales, very often, like a third of them don't end on a good note. A lot of people die, the protagonists die. So this is why, what Tolkien did to that story, what you said, it's actually not depends on, who you ask, but it's not just a happy ending or like what happens to Tuor and all that. So this is very similar to the, you mentioned on fairy stories, and is very similar to what the Brothers Grimm, who collected real stories. And now we come back to what Tolkien said, he wanted it to feel real, and it could be real. He doesn't say it is real, but it could be real. Right. And that's what makes it so magical for me. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. And I'm sorry. I was just going to say, and you're certainly right about the Brothers Grimm. Some Americans will still read the Brothers Grimm. Most, I think, are not raised on it. Like it does not surprise me to hear you were in Germany, but yeah, that's true. There are a lot of American parents who wouldn't read those to their kids because they're so violent and bloody. But Tolkien would, he strongly spoke against the cleaning up of fairy tales for children. Oh, the Disney dwarves. Yep. Well, we know.
I wanted to switch tacks for a little bit and talk to you about education a little bit and about Signum. If that's okay. Absolutely. So you're the president of an online university, for those who don't know, which is Signum University. Yes. You've been in business for 7 years now?
9, actually.
Oh gosh. Okay. So it's been going nearly as long as you've been broadcasting then.
Yes, it has.
And you offer courses in English literature and certain obscure sort of ancient languages like Old Norse and things like this, which I absolutely love that you do that. Because...
Germanic. It is my belief that Signum University has the only Germanic philology program in the world that is rapidly growing in enrollment. I mean, Germanic philology programs are like dying everywhere. I mean, they're like university after university is shutting down their philology programs. But it's booming at Signum. It's one of our most popular programs.
I imagine it would be. I mean, it goes with the Tolkien territory, of course.
Yes.
And I think Tolkien himself would actually be pleased with what you're doing there, because it's...
Especially during COVID.
He would be sad about the state of philology, I think, in today's world. And I think you alone would probably make him believe in the power of the internet as well.
Well, I would hope so. I mean, it would that would take some doing, I think. Yeah. But you know, in the end, I don't know. I wonder. I mean, he loved. I mean, you know. There's a reason that he told the kinds of stories that he did, right? He really wanted people to read his stories. So he was, I think he would have, you know, it's easy to say Tolkien with his resistance to technology would have disliked the internet, but there's a lot of things he would have liked about the internet. You know, he certainly would have seen its dangers, and I'm sure he would have ranted about the misuse of the internet in various ways. But the way in which it enables, the connection with people and it's so many people to be able to read and study, and
knowledge available
exactly
for people who don't live near to a library or
exactly. Yeah. So now I can't imagine he would object to that, but no, it is true. It's, there are a bunch of people who look at our course offerings. We have a master's degree in language and literature, and that was explicitly, by the way, the name of our program, and the sort of the philosophy of our program is explicitly modeled after Tolkien's valedictory address when he, his address when he retired from Oxford, where he talked about Lang and Lit, and how you should always study language and literature together. That to separate them and to do them separately is really a disservice to both. So that's why we from the beginning we're like, okay, we're gonna follow Tolkien's advice, and we're gonna do language and literature together, and require everybody who's in our degree program to do languages and to do literature, and ideally together. So we've designed our program that way. But yeah. It is true that a lot of people look at our offerings and they're like, this is a little weird. Like, you've got fantasy literature, and you've got, Gothic language, and you've got, like, what's the, and you've got like Star Trek, like, what's the common thread, among all these things? The common thread is Tolkien, basically. The common thread is in the sense that we really began offering Tolkien courses. I mean, it all came from, again, Tolkien fans in my podcast wanting to do courses. So I'm like, okay, let's do courses. So we started doing Tolkien courses, and then we started sort of spreading out to kind of adjacent things, right? Other things that people who like Tolkien were really interested in. So imaginative literature, meaning fantasy and science fiction in general, that whole kind of undertaking that, that Tolkien was supportive of. Not only, I mean, a lot of people don't realize Tolkien liked science fiction. Tolkien read Isaac Asimov. He liked science fiction. I mean, it wasn't his main thing, but he did read it and like it.
The Lost Road, it almost is a science fiction.
It is.
In a way, isn't it? We didn't finish it, but
right. Yeah, exactly. And the Notion Club papers, of course, deals with it even more, the whole science fiction question. But anyway, then of course, Germanic philology, because Tolkien, Tolkien has inspired so many readers to love languages, and to want to learn, the kinds of languages that Tolkien knew and that you get tastes of in The Lord of the Rings. And then now spreading out from there to classical and medieval and Renaissance literature, again, mostly just like those things that Tolkien read and loved so much. Again, it's not like it's all explicitly Tolkien focused, but that really is where we began, and it's kind of the heart of where our curriculum, it is definitely the seed from which our curriculum is grown.
So you've grown into areas that are adjacent to Tolkien. I guess it's the next step of expansion, areas that are adjacent to areas that are adjacent to Tolkien. So
yeah, sort of.
So you have to keep growing, I think. I mean, we don't have to, but
right.
It seems like the natural, ambitious step is to keep growing and keep building more courses and adding new things.
Definitely.
What are the limitations as you grow? I mean, because you're going to run into economies of scale, possibly. I mean, your program scales pretty well already, from what I can tell.
That's the main thing. I mean, so the chief advantage we have there is that we don't the primary barrier to scale. For a normal university is physical space, right? I mean, if you're going to bring in a whole new population of students, you've got to have somewhere to put them. You've got to have dorms, and you've got to have classrooms and everything else. And we, of course, have none of those logistic considerations whatsoever. So it reminds me when we were under our official review by the state of New Hampshire, where we're located. I remember having this conversation with some of the evaluators when they were like, are you guys prepared for growth? And we're like, no, we're prepared for growth. It's like, but what, you don't have large financial reserves. What would you do if you got 3 times as many students? And I'm like, well, we'd have a lot more financial reserves then, wouldn't we? I'm like it wouldn't, because, and they couldn't, they were so used to thinking about physical campuses, right? I mean, that's the world they've always lived in. They literally couldn't imagine our world. And I'm like, you have to understand.
Well, especially with all those Ivy Leagues, New England.
Right. Yeah. It's very old school and traditional up here. Yeah. And yeah, there are only 2 costs attached to expansion for us. One, of course, is to expand our software licenses a little bit, which just does not cost very much, right? And is easily covered by the additional tuition, and then more professors. Of course, we would need more faculty because we keep our class sizes really small. But for better or for worse, for better when we're hiring, for worse for the sake of so many people, underemployed but excellent literature and language PhDs, that is an unfortunately abundant resource in our world. It's not hard to find faculty, so it's one of my favorite things to do. Oh my goodness. There's nothing I love more than hiring people, being able to be like, hey, PhD holders, professors out there, we're hiring people, come and get a job from us. Oh man, I love to be able to offer jobs to people. It's so much fun, but yeah, it's not hard. It is not hard. You put out an ad and say, we have openings, come teach Tolkien and fantasy literature with us, and get paid for it. And people come. It's not hard to fill.
I always wanted to hold a lesson because I studied German literature, and I always wanted to hold a lesson because I do think the Ring of the Nibelungen strongly, like the original, the book.
Yes.
Influenced Tolkien heavily.
Definitely.
I always wanted to hold a lecture, so one day come back to me.
Okay. I
studied that. I wrote my thesis on it.
on the Nibelungs. Yeah. Great. No, there's a lot of I never did too much with the German. I mean, I read the Ring of the Nibelungs, and I did some with Parsifal and with especially Gottfried and the Tristan.
Gottfried Saga. Yes.
Yeah. Really, really, really great stuff. So yeah, no, we would love to do more medieval German stuff. That would be excellent. But anyway, yeah, no, it's so again, so scale is is pretty simple for us. It's really one of the of all of the challenges that we face, that is not a difficult one at all. And it's one of the things that's just really been fun about the model, about being, making the decision from the start. We're going to be a completely virtual institution. We've been, since we launched in fall of 2011, we not only are all of our classes online, all of our staff and professors are distributed too. We've been working from home since long before it was cool. It's just the life that we've always had, and there are a lot of challenges that has introduced over the years, and which we still confront. Legal difficulties, because it has been unusual until this year. It has been unusual. But there are so many advantages to it that have made things really fun.
And you just alluded to a little while ago, but you've applied for accreditation from the state of New Hampshire. You announced last year, I believe it was.
Yeah. So
so how's that going? Is my question.
Well, it's very well. So okay. So there are two separate things. In America, things work a little differently.
Right.
So
you might have to explain for us.
Yeah, even people in America don't understand this, to be totally honest.
Well, that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. No. So there's two different processes. There's the authorization to run a school at all, like the initial, and that is, in most European places, it's the same thing as accreditation. Like, that's what accreditation is. In America, they're two totally separate processes. You get authorized by the state. So you have to go through a process of authorization, and each of the 50 states in America does that process separately, which is delightfully confusing. And but then once you have state authorization, then you apply for accreditation. And accreditation is it's optional, and it's totally separate. And it's run not by the government at all, but by private companies. It's who do the accreditation. So it's a different process. So that's the process that we're in right now. We've applied. And it's a process. It's a long process. Going well, but it's a long process, and I can neither say when exactly we will be done with that process, nor can I promise that our review will be successful. I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but we're doing it, and it's going well.
Good.
But do you have a lot of people who, like us, who have a job and do it on the side?
Oh, yes.
And not as a main. Yeah, that's what I would imagine. Because the thing is, I loved university life. That is, I think, what you miss when you have that just online thing.
Absolutely.
Online is beautiful because everybody, like somebody in India, can join your class without needing the funds to move to New Hampshire physically or move wherever. And that's beautiful and that's cool. And but it's just, the thing, like that feeling of living on a campus.
Absolutely.
I wouldn't trade my campus memories for anything. But if I was to go back to studying now, it would be something like this. So it would. But
a lot of people do it. Besides, this is what I like. I'm doing in Oxford now. One of the courses next to my regular job. I would imagine a lot of people are interested in to do that with your courses. That would
absolutely.
It's more like a hard, like a project.
Yes.
It's not, you don't get a better job when you
exactly. Yeah. No, it's almost, there are some of our students who so we have a master's degree program, and some of our students who have gotten our master's degree have indeed gone on to apply to PhD programs and have entered PhD programs. Cool. So for them, it's a step along, a potential career path. Yeah. But for the majority of people, it is for personal enrichment, and the highest goal of many of the people in our program is basically to become an independent scholar, to become somebody who can attend Tolkien conferences, maybe get some things published, be involved in the academic conversation. And that's, and many of them have achieved that. I'm on a few lists, of Tolkien scholars, list talking about various conferences and things like that. And I always get a little thrill when one of like my current or former Signum students posts on that, and I'm like, there they are engaging in the Tolkien world. That's great. But anyway, so but yes, so to address both of those things, there is no question. There's nothing like the campus experience, and I've been a proponent of online education for a decade now. And for exactly the reasons, Helen, that you were saying, there's so many people who would not have the opportunity to do this, and it's worth it. At no point would I ever suggest that it's a perfect replacement for regular college. Like, you're not going to get the same thing that you get with the campus experience. So many of those elements are not going to be there, but that's not the point, right? If you can do the campus, great, do it. Absolutely. Go ahead and do that. But for the other 90% of people in the world who can't afford to be, and I say 90% because we're not talking about, that most of the people in the world, even people who did go to university, well, they can't now, either because they're now working and there's no way they can, or because they already went and they can't do it again. So even those of us who did attend a regular university, I only did that for 10% of my life, and the other, 40 odd years of my life I've spent off campus. So, again, it's so yes, it's no replacement for the on-campus experience. But it is something that is available that makes something available to people that often isn't otherwise. And it is certainly true. Almost all of our Signum students, in fact, I believe that 100% of our Signum students who have attended our program are part-time students. Almost all of them have jobs. Sometimes they'll be home with families. They won't be working a full-time job, but everybody takes. Very few people, like in the history of Signum, even in a single semester, have taken more than one or two of our courses at a time. They generally just take one or two courses a term, because it's sort of a side project of theirs, but it's like a passion project of theirs, something that they've been wanting to do generally for a really long time. It's so funny, in higher education in America, there is an enormous amount of pressure on career preparation. Right. Yeah. And of course, the reason for that pressure is that it costs money. So much. Right. Yeah. You've got to prove that there's value there, right? Yeah. That you're going to get a return on investment. And so more and more of like accrediting bodies and the state authorizations and stuff, they want to make sure that if you're charging all this money, your students are getting something out of it. And so they're constantly like, what are the career outcomes of your students? And we're just like, look, people, first of all, it doesn't cost that much money, right? We've cut our tuition. The tuition that we charge is a fraction of it's like less than a quarter of what most places charge in tuition. So we don't have to justify our tuition rates. It's what people can afford. And if they can't afford to pay it, we let students come and take courses for free. You can come to Signum and do work with us instead. You can basically work your way through Signum. We have students who come and we give them a job, in our digital campus. We there's all kinds of roles that our students can do to help with the work of the university and support the university. And we give them tuition remission in exchange for that. So even if you can't afford even our really low tuition, we can work it out, right?
Oh, I love that.
It's really fun. Yeah. And oh my goodness, what a rewarding program that has been. A huge percentage of the people who are now like regular staff at Signum University started off as students, and we have several people on our at our highest levels of administration who are originally students doing work study and
like
just
a family
oh my goodness, yeah, and they made themselves just irreplaceable at the university and have stayed on because they love the university and want to continue supporting it. But anyway, so first of all, again, we don't have to justify our tuition because it's really, really low. But in addition, it's not about that. Like we don't promise anybody. Like we do zero marketing like so many institutions of higher education do. Come, spend the money to get this degree, because if you do, it'll help you to get this really high paying job.
Yeah.
We don't make any promises like that. We say, come do this because it's fun and awesome. And we deliver the fun and awesome, like it happens. And that's what people want. And so it's kind of fun, actually. Sometimes I'll be writing these paragraphs like in our accreditation documentation and stuff, and be like, what are the expected career outcomes? And I will say none at all. Like, people take our courses for fun and because they love them, and we follow through on that. They get what they want.
Lord of the Ring YouTuber. Do you know how I have a few friends who did this for Game of Thrones, and they literally became very, very rich doing this and quit their normal jobs. I have a friend who was a lawyer, and he quit his job and does YouTube and talking about stuff he likes. He has more time for his family. Things are changing, and I think things in education, I see that are changing. I was a very snobby student. I only went. I went to LSE in London, which is like kind of Ivy League in Europe. Right. And stuff like that. And I was very, I want this kind of job in a blue chip company, so I need to do this and this and this. It was literally a set of rules, right?
Yes.
Like you said. And then you need to do your MBA. You don't learn anything doing your MBA. You literally just pay a lot of money for your future getting more money back.
Right.
It's like, what? And the older I got, the more I'm like, no, it doesn't make sense. And I think a lot of people I see that in HR departments, that people change their attitude towards, oh, you need a PhD and this to do your job, because obviously doctors, please study medicine. Best case scenario.
Best case scenario, yeah. Agreed.
But I think a lot changed, and I love that, because you give people tools and you teach them stuff, and maybe who knows, one of your students might write the most famous book on, I don't know, comparing Lewis and Tolkien and German myth, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely
it's cool, it's good, and
there's real value there. There's real value there, which is separate, as you say, from that whole kind of career track model of things. I agree. And you just pointed to something that I think is super important when thinking about the future of higher education. Higher education is changing very significantly in exactly that way. That the 4-year degree, the bachelor's degree, has been for many years the most important credential. Like, you can't get a good job if you don't have a bachelor's degree. That's changing. And that's going to start changing pretty fast now, because the bachelor's degree does not mean what it used to mean, and it's not very useful. And more companies are finding it's not very useful as a credential anymore. It's still there. It's not dead yet. But it's dying, and more companies are going to be starting to articulate different kinds of credentials that they're going to be looking for, and more sort of flexible and kind of more granular and modular kinds of credentials that you can build. And I think that's very exciting. I think that there's a really exciting world that is coming, and I do not think that it is, certainly in America, that traditional higher education is ready to handle it at all.
No, they're not. Although they are a little bit, you know what? Because I did at the Columbia University, I did online marketing, because when I studied, and I started a marketing job, like marketing was different. Now it's online marketing. And Columbia University and a lot of Ivy League universities offer online programs. They make a lot of money. I paid a lot of money.
Oh, they sure do.
And it's online. But I do think they understood it a bit, because I didn't need to be on the campus and everything. They still made a lot of money with me, and they literally just had to put what you did. But this is actually what you're doing. They need to put up this online thing. You get a few good professors and do this and make money with me. But I think they do in a way, but they can't let go of their physical. That's
true. But also the other thing that they can't let go of is the traditional degree structure, right? And that's the other thing that's been, that's going to be harder, I think.
But there's almost a kind of ritual and ceremony about higher education.
It is, yes.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, anyone who's ever been to a sort of a graduation ceremony, we'll know that.
There's no, in America at least, there's no other sort of element of society in which people still like put on medieval costumes on a regular basis, right? I mean, like the whole robe thing that we do now, we don't do it like on a regular basis, like for class, as was traditional at Oxford, say. But even, like, as you say, the graduation ceremony, it has a kind of medieval pageantry to it that is, I mean, the only other place in American society where you can see anything even vaguely like that is weddings. Right. But even there, it's much more modern than graduations are. So no, I mean, as you say, steeped in tradition in ways which are really unique in modern societies, I think. And there's a lot to love about that in a lot of ways, but it's also indicative, right? This is something that really is not, I mean, higher education. At Helen, in the business world, they talk about, the importance of being agile, right? And being able to adapt to circumstances. Higher education, institutions of higher education are about as agile as a cruise ship, or some of them. Those are the good ones. Others are about as agile as an iceberg. I mean, it is not what higher education is good at. And of course, it's certainly one way in which we've aspired to be different, and our lack of a physical campus and all of the set costs that come with that, the fixed costs that come with a campus, it enables us to be a good deal more agile. But Dan, you were talking before about like what comes next and expansion and things. We are our next expansion, instead of just expanding, like continuing to go like adjacent to the adjacent things and move out. I've been tempted to do that at various points and be like, okay, now let's do a master's degree in history or something like that, right? Something that's kind of next door to what we do. Instead of that, we're going to be launching an undergraduate program. And our undergraduate program is going to be focused on the humanities more, and it's going to be an interdisciplinary humanities program. And I'm really excited about that because the humanities, there's a screaming need for this in America. The humanities have been really marginalized, especially in America, but I see it happening in Europe too. And the reason for that, it's very easy to see the reason for this. The reason for this, it's all back to the way in which higher education has justified its high cost by linking it to job performance, right? The formula for higher education is study this because if you study this, it will enable you to get that job, right? And the fact is there are very few jobs, especially jobs that pay well, that say, only history majors need apply, or like only philosophy majors need apply. Like there are not very many jobs like that. So the humanities come off looking very, very non-competitive. They look irrelevant. Like what, this won't lead you to get any jobs. So why should anybody study it? And so it's been more and more marginalized especially in American higher education, to the point now where you see people shutting down humanities programs all the time. They're just closing they're dissolving departments, or they're merging departments together and firing half the faculty. This is even happening at big schools in America, large state universities doing away.
Especially this year, I would think, as well.
Oh, my goodness. Yes, that was before the crisis of 2020. Absolutely. And now things are much worse. But of course, my personal frustration with that is that the people like the schools who treat the humanities like that, it's because the train of thought that the need to justify their high fees has brought them to is really leading them to ask the wrong question. If you're thinking of academic study only as direct preparation for a particular job, right? Like what you need, training in order to get this particular job, you're doing it wrong. Like that is not what it's about, right? It should be about preparing yourself.
I was very different in university to Helen. I wasn't looking at job prospects and money and things. Not that she's only motivated by that. I don't mean to suggest that, but
right.
But my bachelor's degree was in computer game design.
Okay.
so that's what I do for a living now in my day job. I'm not a designer. I'm not a designer, but I'm a developer. So I'm a programmer.
Right.
And I remember my very first lecture. My lecturer stood in front of everybody, and he sort of, he was talking about what to expect on the course and what kind of things we'll be learning about, that sort of thing, introducing everything. And then he stopped and he said, and I have to tell you that less than 20% of you will ever work in the games industry at all. Like,
right.
And we're all sort of looking around at each other going, like, who's going to make it?
Right.
He started off saying, actually, probably a third of you will drop out before the end of the 3 years, which was probably true as well.
Right.
So I was one of the lucky ones there. This is leading into a segue, believe me. What I want to ask you about is Lord of the Rings Online,
right?
Because that's something else you do, which is fun. You stream that on Twitch, and you have 2 separate slots during the week. Where you take general lore questions about Lord of the Rings,
yes,
and the other is sort of your archaeological exploration of the game world that you do after exploring Lord of the Rings.
That's right.
So I guess my question is, what do you find so appealing about the game, and why should people enjoy it, and why should book readers enjoy it, and also why should Helen play it, because Helen's considering playing it.
Oh,
at least she told me recently.
Yeah. You do that? Yeah. I just don't have it on my new Mac. I need to download everything.
Okay.
I did play it for a long time.
Okay. Yeah, you told me you played it before, but you told me recently you were considering playing it again.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I love about the Lord of the Rings Online is that it's a really brilliant adaptation of Tolkien's works. There have been a lot of Lord of the Rings games over the years, as you know, surely, Dan, but a lot of them have just been like either let's play the movie characters, right, or they've been a pretty simple, let's
smash some orcs.
Smash some orcs. Like, you get to be Frodo and Aragorn smashing a bunch of orcs, right? So what the Lord of the Rings Online has done is a fascinating. First of all, they're wonderful readers of the text, and that's been apparent from the very beginning. I remember one of my earliest experiences in the Lord of the Rings Online. I got to Tom Bombadil's house, right? Which you get to pretty early in the game. And I got to Tom Bombadil's, and the very first thing I did was I ran back around behind to the backyard of the house to see if there were lines of beans on poles that you could see outside the windows in the back of the house. And there are. They have beans on poles in the backyard. And I'm like, okay, this is legit right here. This is legit. Anyway, no, I mean, they're such careful readers of the text. But more than just paying attention to detail and making sure that, like, when you go to the house at Crick Hollow, which you get to after, Fatty Bulger has fled and the Nazgul have come up, there's a slashed cloak on the threshold of the front door, right? Just like it's just like it mentions, that Gandalf found. So, it's not just that, right? It's not just their attention to detail. They're really thoughtful and perceptive readers, and the kinds of stories that and the way that they deal with the themes from the book within the stories that they put in their quest lines, the remarkable cleverness and resourcefulness with which they enable the players to kind of shadow the main story without impinging on the story, participating but not just recapitulating the primary story all the way through. The way in which they manage to provide a kind of depth to the story, to elements of the story, to tell the untold tales that are only glimpsed in the story. My favorite example of that, of course, is the riding of the Grey Company, right? So, of course, when the Dunedain, when they meet when the Dunedain meet up with Aragorn in Rohan, right, and we learn that they've traveled down from Rivendell and have been searching for Aragorn. In the game, of course, not only do you get to actually travel with the Grey Company as they come all the way down the map from Rivendell, basically kind of do it in little jumps. But not only do you follow the Great Company all the way down, but prior to that, in the earlier parts of the game, you've gotten to know each single member of the Grey Company by name because you've encountered them at various places and done quests with them. So that, like, when the Grey Company shows up and they fight with Aragorn at the Battle of Pelennor Field, you know the backstory and the names of every single Dunedain who fights and dies often, of course, many of them, at the Battle of Pelennor Field. It gives this this very it's so well done. It is such an interesting investment in the story. So yeah, my like archeo gaming stuff that I do is really, it's a tribute to the depth of their thoughtfulness and adaptation, that I love to just kind of go through and say, all right, what's the story that they're telling, right? Those are kind of the two threads that I do. On Tuesday nights, I'm exploring the world scene by scene, right? I'm just kind of going around and looking at everything and seeing the kinds of stories that they are suggesting, and the relationship between the game story and the book story, based on how they've built the world itself and what you can just observe by looking at it. On the Friday afternoon ones that I do, on the Twitch of the official Twitch channel for the Lord of the Rings Online, there I am answering lore questions. It's my general Q&A time every week, but it also is where I'm going through the entire, like, all of the quest lines, basically, like doing the complete story from beginning to end.
Yeah, because you're an archaeological character. He sort of just makes everybody else play the game for him, doesn't he? Really?
Yeah, he doesn't. He gained his first experience points the other day by accident, actually. I've been gaming with him for 4 years without gaining a single experience point, which I was pretty proud of.
I see a pattern here. When you're going through the Lord of the Ring books and doing this.
Exactly. No, I love being thorough in discussing, and again, it's just part of that that whole lifelong experience from when I was a kid, of like how the Lord of the Rings, this world and this story, it's something that keeps giving back to you. The more times you read it and the more you invest in it. And the Lord of the Rings Online is such a good adaptation of that story that, it partakes of that richness. They have invested so much in that story and in their thinking about the books. I have enormous respect for the team of folks at Standing Stone who have done such a wonderful job over the years, especially Chris Pearson, who is their primary, the senior lore monkey, as he gives his job description or his job title.
Somebody else I'd probably enjoy interviewing, I'd imagine.
Oh, you absolutely should. He's
like
he's
the
really great.
Group of Star Wars, basically.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, anyway, as I said, I have great respect for them as readers and thinkers about Tolkien's world, and I just I also, it's something I've become really interested in over the last 10 years or so. Increasingly over time, I've become more and more interested in adaptation and sort of creative engagement with Tolkien's world, and that's something. That's what Tolkien did. That, like, he couldn't help it. There's a reason he didn't publish. There's a reason he didn't publish more scholarly work, like more philology books in his career, right? And the reason was because he was doing the Lord of the Rings instead, right? He's doing something, but not in the way, some people think like, oh, he was like just writing fiction books for fun when he should have been writing serious scholarly work, but that's not it at all, right? The Lord of the Rings, that is his philology book, right? His legendarium is
it's another form of teaching, right?
It absolutely is. This is how Tolkien thought, right? He engaged best with academic and intellectual questions by engaging with it creatively. And
that's like what you were saying about Morgoth's Ring, where he was working through problems, where he was literally writing stories in order to figure out philosophically what has changed since the Lord of the Rings. He was writing new things.
Absolutely. And this is the same way that he dealt with stuff. And, so when he was thinking about the history of the Gothic language and how the Gothic language was related to other Germanic languages of about that period, how did he do that? Like, how did he work through that stuff? Well, he worked through that stuff in Appendix A, right? He worked through that stuff by thinking about the changes of language from the Rohirrim and where they come. And you can see the Gothic names, Vidugavia and, the Gothic names up there from Rovanian, right? You can see him thinking through some of these very questions, which he should have been publishing scholarly articles on, but instead he was writing the Lord of the Rings, but he was doing it in the Lord of the Rings. He was thinking about Beowulf, and instead of writing a book on Beowulf, he writes Rohan. Right, we get Rohan, which contains so many of his contemplations of Beowulf and much of his analysis of Beowulf.
The Hobbit, I always say, is kind of like Beowulf, but from the thief's perspective.
Right, exactly. So yes, thinking about creative engagement as a way of as a form of academic and intellectual engagement. Tolkien has really kind of helped me see that. And so I myself have become much more interested in that. And I love seeing how other people do it, whether it's the kind of creative engagement that the Lord of the Rings Online folks have done, or of course, the films, screen adaptations also are very interesting in that regard. I'm really interested about the things that are coming, right? The Amazon, both the Amazon series and the Amazon game that are both coming. I'm really interested in both of those. And of course, and so I've been doing my own projects with this for a while. The Silmarillion film project that I've been working on now for 5 years. Is we're planning a totally theoretical and imaginary adaptation.
For everybody who hasn't seen it, it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy that one.
It's only been in the last couple of years that I'm like, I never thought. I thought of that from the beginning as a totally academic exercise, right? Yeah. And it's only in the last couple of years that I've really begun to realize it's like a creative outlet for me. I love that as a creative outlet, being able to think through the Silmarillion stories in a creative way, to be, which adaptation really forces you to engage with something imaginatively and creatively in ways that you don't have to, if you're just, reading and writing criticism of it.
It needs to be it could be true factor, and that's what you give it with that form.
Yeah. Oh, it's so much fun. So yeah, I've come to love that stuff much more. So a lot of that is involved in my Lotro stuff. And again, it's because they at the Lord of the Rings Online have done such a good job with their own engagement with the text that I find it, I've been streaming Lotro, in those ways, with that kind of, detailed analysis for years now, for more than, 4 or 5 years. And it's still very, very rewarding. And I'm working my way, so my character that I created on my first session of my stream, and have been carrying through and, questing through and doing all of the storyline. He's now level 90, he's maybe halfway through all of the content. There's still so much. He's still got half of Rohan and all of Gondor, and then Mordor, and then all the other new places they've made since then. So I'm still way behind the game. They actually produce the game faster than I can play it, because I just don't have enough time. I'm doing it. So I very rarely get to play outside of my stream. I mean, I look forward to my stream times every week, because it's like the time I get to game every week. I really look forward to it. But so I mean, there's always more, and the remarkable dedication that they've shown is really wonderful.
Yeah, they've done a really good job. It should be me that you're persuading to play the game, because I've never got through more than a few hours of it personally, but that's because I know about massively multiplayer online games and how much time they take. Yes,
certainly. And Lotro is...
I'm quite addictive as well. Like, I will get addicted to something like that, especially in Middle-earth.
No, exactly. I resisted for a long time. I knew about Lotro from when it launched, and I deliberately didn't play it when it launched. especially, I mean, at the time when it launched, I was like an untenured faculty member and everything. I did not have, not that I have time now, but at least now it's like part of my job in a sense, right? But at least I can justify it that way. But yeah, I mean, so there was a long delay, and it wasn't actually, Dan, until I heard Chris Pearson give a talk about it. And I was like, okay, I can't resist this anymore. I really need to know about this. I really need to see this. So anyway, so I haven't regretted it, but yes, it's now, I believe it is now the largest game world in history.
Yeah.
I think I don't think there's a single sort of stable game world that is bigger.
Keeping updates. And,
yes. Yeah. I mean, obviously, and by bigger, I mean literally the size of the game world, like the amount of gaming space, not largest in terms of like number of players or something like that. But as far as like being able to go and explore the game world and do all the, it is so.
Well, yes, they blow up the scale quite a lot as well, don't they, compared with what's in the books? Because they have to.
Well, I mean, they certainly cover areas. Of course, the scale is one of the sort of the continuously sort of comical things.
On a micro level, they blow things up. But then on a macro level, things are actually less far apart than they are.
Yeah, exactly. Like it takes you running on foot. It takes you about 5 to 10 minutes to go from Buckland to Bree, for instance. So it's much smaller in scale, of course. And I forget. I forget. Somebody did the math. Somebody calculated based on estimates of distances on the Middle Earth maps. If you actually were traveling across Middle Earth on Tolkien's scale at the rate at which your horse travels across the gaming world, you'd be going like 2 times the speed of sound, basically. So, but obviously the game world is big enough even at that scale. But yeah, the way, that's one of the things that's so much fun about it, the way in which they are able to take you, because in the books, you stick to this one thread, right? This one line, and there's so much of the world you don't see. Yeah. And so being able to explore, Dunland and and down in like southern Gondor, right? Down like Dol Amroth, and I mean, so many places that are only names in the book that are only just alluded to. Fornost and Onuminous, and I mean, so many things. And you get to go there and you get to see those places. And they just, the latest thing that they just released a couple months ago was Mount Gundabad up in the north of the Misty Mountains. So, I mean, it's, they've done the whole Iron Hills and the settlements of the dwarves up there around the Lonely Mountain. It's been cool. So
have they done Dorwinion yet? Because I really want to go and get drunk in Dorwinion.
Not yet. I think they're adjacent. I don't think so. I've not fully explored it yet. I've only done a couple tourist trips to that area. I haven't quested in that area, but I've only just been to visit the Lonely Mountain and Lake Town and Dale and the Elf King's halls and stuff. Like the major tourist sites, basically. I haven't explored the whole area, so I don't think they went all the way to Dorwinion, but I'm sure the vineyards are going to be pretty epic when they get there.
They'd have to be, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I mean, I asked for an hour and a half of your time, and we've now gone 15 minutes over. I'm happy to keep talking, but I can wrap this up if you'd like me to.
I should probably go before too long, but going over is not uncharted ground for me. No. So,
and we'll just invite you, or I will just invite you back one day, and we will.
I would love to do that. Yes. That would be great.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed this talk. What we talked about beforehand, Helen and I talked about beforehand, is if you would be willing, is to come back again at some point and talk about something a bit more specific.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know what yet.
Sure.
Potentially the Amazon show, which maybe we should spend 10 minutes on, because I would kind of like to know what your hopes and fears are about that particular adaptation as well.
Yeah, so I'll start with the.
I realise I'm in slightly troubling waters here as well, because you also know people who were contracted to work on it as well.
So when it comes to the Amazon series, I am certainly at this point under no relaxed to not talk about it. So I can definitely talk about it. But I'll start with my hopes and then my fears. As far as my hopes go, first of all, I'm always optimistic about this kind of thing. I mean, I don't know. In my opinion, like, life is too short to be too worried about it's easy. You can convince yourself it's going to be horrible. Like, it's possible to be like, oh, it's going to be terrible. They're going to do awful things to it. It might be awful. Who knows? Right. But like, why worry about that? But before you have to, it might be awesome too. It might be really good. And here's the thing. I love that. So two things, the two things that they've done that I absolutely love, which are to me just wonderful, are first the decision to make it a long-running serial thing, right? The biggest problem with the Peter Jackson adaptations is they're so short. Like, it shouldn't be feature films, right? Feature film is the wrong genre for that. You can't do justice to any book in a feature film.
20 years ago, that was the only place to get the budget.
Exactly, right.
You can't flesh out characters. You can't show character development. It's not
the equivalent. I mean, the feature film is the equivalent of the short story, not the equivalent of the book or the novel. I mean, it's not appropriate. And as you say, Dan, I mean, I'm not blaming Jackson. He had no choice back then. But so that was the first thing. The first thing that was my very, very first reaction was, finally, we're going to get an adaptation which has the opportunity to do more justice to the whole story. Because you can have, I would, if I were, pitching it to somebody at the beginning, what I would have pitched was, give me at least one season per book, not per volume, per book. So 6 seasons from, the Long Expected Party to the Grey Havens, minimum. And ideally more. With that, oh man, you could do so much more with that. You'd still have to compress a lot, but you could do so much more. So I loved the fact that they were preparing to take their time and do the story in much longer form. Loved that. And then the information started to come out, with the map of Numenor and stuff like that. And it became clearer and clearer that not only were they committed to a form which would allow for a long-term story, but they were going to start the Lord of the Rings in the Second Age with the forging of the Rings of Power. And I'm like, that's doing it properly, right? That's starting the Lord of the Rings where it should be started, way back. Absolutely. Like, bring it on. Let's have the whole season. I hope season 1 doesn't end before the Battle of the Last Alliance at the earliest, that to me would be just gorgeous to have the kind of scale.
If I'm wrong, but the license is only for the Second Age, is it not? So they wouldn't.
We don't know. We don't know. We know for a fact that a new license was negotiated by Amazon. We do not know the content of that license. And this was one of the main sources of speculation, because many of the Numenorian elements in particular from the map, there are a number of things on that map that are only in Unfinished Tales, that are not in
and woods and
and that was strictly forbidden before. The Unfinished Tales has never been included in any of the licensing. It's only The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings exclusively. So we don't know. We have no idea what the license is. So now I do not think, and have no real suspicions, that the Silmarillion is included in the license.
No. Well, I mean, it can't even be the whole Unfinished Tales either, really, could it? Because
probably not.
There are Silmarillion elements in there, so you probably wouldn't be able to use those.
The way that the licenses have generally been articulated legally is that so for instance, you could say, well, hey, if you have the license for the Lord of the Rings, you can do Beren Lúthien, right? Because Beren Lúthien,
Aragorn sings about
Aragorn sings about it. Sam talks about it, right? So I mean, the names are there, the storyline is mentioned, right? So you can totally do Beren Lúthien if you've got the license to the Lord of the Rings. Legally, no. Actually, they can't. Because the way that the license is generally articulated is that if names or a story within the books come up, but the primary version of those names and stories is in an unlicensed text like the Silmarillion, and there's no question that the Silmarillion version of the Beren Lúthien story is the primary version, and the just like, so for instance, you can't have Orome as a character just because he's used in one simile. You know, when Theoden is compared to Orome the Great charging, right, when he's charging on Pelennor Field, that doesn't give you license to like use Orome as a character because he's primarily a Silmarillion character. So so therefore, I presume that even if they did have the license for Unfinished Tales, that would still apply. So you couldn't use the Tuor and Turambar material from Unfinished Tales because the Silmarillion is still the primary place where the Turin story is told, and you don't have the license for that. But it would give you the license. You could easily argue that the Numenor stuff. You know, that like, especially like the chapters on Numenor is even more like, especially for the map material, for the names and things, that is it's the only place it exists. It's not even in the Akalabath. So anyway, so I don't know. I don't know what's in the, I have no inside information about this. I'm not, you know, don't anybody quote me as saying I've got inside information. I'm just saying how the license has worked and that there has been speculation wondering whether or not they might have Unfinished Tales. Anyway, so these are the things that give me hope. These are the things that I really love. I love the scope of the project. I love their approach to it. You know, the way that they're going back to the old versions of the stories and stuff. And also,
Alan Lee and John Howe being involved, I think, is really, really important as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as far as I know, they're still involved.
Yes. So no, I think that's and they're clearly taking it seriously. I mean that there's a real investment in. I mean, even just like from a financial level. I mean, Amazon has invested unbelievable amounts of money in this production. So you got to think that they're gonna, you know, they're in several ways of thinking they're going to do it properly. It's not going to be just a sort of a slapdash production. So that's great. Excellent. Very exciting. Of course, there's been the recent controversy that has been sort of swirling around it about, you know, stories of nudity and, you know, stuff. I'm
sure it won't be brothels of Middle Earth. I mean, come on, it's not.
I don't think so. No. So when I think about it, right, you know, a lot of people have, you know, asked me about this, right, and they've been like, okay, what do you think they're doing? I was having a conversation about this with my nephew, who's 20, and he was like, what do you think? Like, seriously, what is the deal with that? Why, you know, how are they going to bring nudity into a Lord of the Rings adaptation? And I'm like, look, I don't think it's going to be like, you know, scene at the Prancing Pony, except this time with topless dancers. Like, I don't think they're going to do that. I've seen nothing.
There's no way that will focus test well ever.
No, nothing in their. Nothing in any of the materials that they have released have suggested that they're going to have that kind of a disregard for the spirit of the story. So when I think about it, I say, okay, if I take for granted and first of all, who knows what's actually going to happen? You know, I mean, like there's some evidence that they're really seriously thinking about this, but we have no idea what it is or what it means, you know, exactly. There's a lot of speculation. There's a lot of speculation based on the fact that people keep comparing it to Game of Thrones. But in my mind, that's a really sloppy comparison. And to say, you know, people say, well, Jeff Bezos is famously quoted as saying, you know, give me the next Game of Thrones. What does that mean? That could mean so many. It doesn't necessarily mean give me lots of topless women. Like, that's not the same. There's so much more to it than that, right?
Saga, and he won.
Yes. That kind of seriousness and that kind of scope and that kind of detail and you know. So I do not think and honestly, in
topless women.
Seriously, it's like there's so much more to it than that. And honestly, the nudity in Game of Thrones, I felt was so much of the time a blemish. I mean, there's so many places where it's like, and now, you know, the topless scene in this episode, and it was I found it quite tiresome often in Game of Thrones itself.
The funny thing is, we as Europeans, you know, well, I mean, Dan is English, but you know, I'm German. I grew up near the French border. Like, for us, it was like a casual day. I know you Americans are different about this, but
we're different about this.
We're like, what's the this is not even anything not normal.
Yeah, and it was yeah.
So we Europeans are, when we had this discussion, we're like, huh? I don't get it.
Well, it is. You're right that it is definitely different in America. But anyway, so when I ask myself, all right, so let's assume they are, going to have, nude scenes. What are they going to do? Like, what's that going to look like? What's that going to mean for the adaptation? I don't know. I mean, the one thing that strikes me that I could imagine them trying to do, because like I said, I don't imagine they're just going to be trying to insert nudity in random spots in the story. Like, I don't think that's going to happen.
No, I don't think they'll be doing sex position.
I don't think so. I don't think so. But what I could imagine is, especially if they're going to depict Numenor, I can imagine them saying, we want to depict like an extravagant and decadent society in Numenor.
And yes, when Sauron comes like Babylon.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Showing the, the wicked and decadent Numenor before its fall. Yeah. And can I imagine them having scenes that have orgies in the background, or maybe even human sacrifices, right? The human sacrifices on the altars of Sauron, stripped naked and sacrificed or something. Yeah. Yes, I can imagine them doing something like that. Do I think that would be the end of the world? I don't think that would be the end of the world. I don't feel like, in my mind, it's not like a necessarily a huge, but the one thing that I would say, I do think it would be a big deal. The thing about the Game of Thrones sexual content, right? They did a lot, and here, to give them credit, they were being true to the spirit of George R.R. Martin's books, because George R.R. Martin's books also have a lot of that same sexual content, and both the books and the show there was a to use a very old-fashioned word, a prurient edge to it, right? Part of the drive was that like sexual enticement, right? That the reader is drawn in you can feel that the books want to have that effect. They're trying to titillate you in those ways. That element, that dynamic within a story, I don't know a single work of literature where that element is more utterly and completely absent than The Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Rings are the least sexually prurient. I mean, it's not to say that there's nobody has sex in Middle-earth. Like, that's not true, right? It's not even to say that there aren't any like sexual subplots, because there is sexual desire.
Look at the crossbreeding of the orcs. That's
goodness. Yeah, I mean, in off-screen,
reproduction, isn't it?
Yeah, there's horrifying sexual content that's unstated in that way.
It's just imagined, but it's
right. But even the when there is, I mean, like Faramir clearly is sexually attracted to Éowyn, right? I mean, like that's there, right? But yet Tolkien never plays on that, right? There's never a scene anywhere in Tolkien's published works in his lifetime where he invites, even indirectly, the reader to experience a vicarious sexual thrill with any of his stories.
But you never miss it. That's the
point.
point.
You never miss it.
You never say, oh my God, this would have been the perfect story if.
Right.
No.
Exactly.
I never thought about it before these people came out with it. Yes. I was like, oh yeah, you're right.
It's alien. That's the kind of worst case scenario, right? The worst case scenario with the whole nudity sexual dynamic there, as has been rumored in the Amazon film. If they go that direction, if they introduce that kind of sexual titillation as an element of the story, that I think would be a serious mistake, because there is nothing that will feel less true to the spirit of Tolkien. There's nothing that will feel more alien to the Lord of the Rings world than that. And I give Peter Jackson massive credit about this.
He made
he did that. He had so many opportunities, right? Even he cast beautiful women, right?
Yeah.
You know, he cast beautiful women as Galadriel and Arwen and Tauriel, even Tauriel, who gets shoehorned into a hugely awkward love triangle. And yet, think about, you know, although Evangeline Lilly was compelled to try to utter some of the worst lines of dialogue ever composed for an actress, she was never asked to wear like skin tight leather. You know, she was never made a sexual object. She never was. Her body's not sexualized. Arwen is never sexualized. Éowyn is never sexualized. I mean, how easy would it have been? How easy would it have been when Arwen is on the battlefield, right? To, you know, have her in some kind of skimpy outfit that looks like something out of like a Dungeons and Dragons illustration, you know, or like a Conan the Barbarian cover or something like that, right? I mean, she could easily have been in this, like, you know, iron brassiere, bare midriff Viking. Chainmail bikini.
Wonder Woman Amazonians, you know, how they're portrayed.
Exactly. I mean, it would have been so easy, and he might even have gotten a pass for it, you know, because it's so normal in I mean, in fact, the way that he refused to do that was countercultural, very countercultural in the film world, right, where he was releasing that. So I give him, so like Peter Jackson got it. Like they realized this, that you can have, you know, beautiful people, right? And there were beautiful people, you know, the beautiful men and women, plenty of beautiful men and women, both in the Lord of the Rings films. And and yet that dynamic was never there. There was never, you know, you were never drawn into sex, you know, experiencing as a viewer sexual desire for, it was just, it's not part of the story. So that's my primary, I won't say it's even a fear of mine, because I have no idea what they're going to do, and it may be fine. But that's my hope, that if they do this, even if they do have nudity, if they resist that, it won't be the end of the world. Yeah. But anyway, so as far as hopes and fears, you know, that's primarily what I got. But I'm primarily looking forward to it. I am excited to see. At the very least, it's going to be a lot of fun to talk about.
Exactly.
You know,
it doesn't need to become canon in my head. You know, it's more about I want to what I imagine Numenor, or that the end, like the last days of Numenor. I want to see that, and not just, there's beautiful fan art out there. Like, oh my god, these. Seriously, these artists are amazing. I always use them for my videos, but I want to see it on film. I'm Agreed. No, it's great. And this is what I always tell people, you know, there are a lot of people who as I say, who worry, right? Who are afraid about it, and who are saying, like, oh, I'm so afraid that, like, they're going to ruin it. I'm like, look, they can't. It's not possible. They can't ruin Tolkien. You will always have Tolkien, right? It's fine. Like the fact that the Bakshi Fellowship of the Ring film from 1978, I think it was, you know, depicted Aragorn without pants and Boromir in a Viking helmet with no pants, right? Like, and the Balrog with like fuzzy boots and butterfly wings, like, you know, that didn't ruin it. Like, it didn't ruin it. Like, the story is still the same. I'm scared of that movie. I saw that as a kid. I'm still scared.
It is kind of scary, actually. And even like Sam's nose scares me to this day. Sam is the biggest nose I've ever seen in that film. Actually, that's the one part of the film that really upsets me, is that they depict Sam as if he were an idiot, which I really dislike. But anyway, the point is, they're not going to ruin it. They can't ruin it. And you can always just not watch it. And
what I think, it will bring more people to the books, and that's a beautiful thing, because people want to know, oh my God, what are they talking about?
Yes.
And that is a good thing.
Absolutely.
And everybody should be happy about that their father's work, you know, comes back in a way.
It is fun to be a Tolkien scholar of my age, because I was in graduate school when the first Tolkien movie came out, right? So that meant when I started teaching, like when I began my career as a professor, I was teaching to like the first generation of movie watchers, right, who discovered Tolkien through the movies. So I saw firsthand that first wave of people who discovered Tolkien for the first time that way. And now, I've been around long enough that I know many Tolkien scholars who themselves discovered, who like those people who went on to become Tolkien scholars and who, who have their roots back in watching the film when they were in high school or whatever. And so like watching that happen. So, I mean, I've seen that, so yes, not only did many people discover the books by watching the films, but many of the people who did discover the books by watching the films have gone on now greatly to enrich the world of Tolkien studies and to go on to teach generations of more students Tolkien, right? So to see that begin up again would be awesome.
Yeah.
It's good to hear that there isn't a kind of like stigma attached to scholars who did get into Tolkien that way, actually.
I don't think so. I mean, there's you will still hear. I mean, I haven't heard this argument in a long time. Still some
elitists out there.
There are. There are definitely elitists out there, and you will still occasionally meet somebody who will say, "I don't think the study of Tolkien was ever enhanced at all by the films," which is just a silly thing to say. I mean, it's an absolutely silly thing to say. I was talking just, I don't know, maybe a year ago online with somebody who was like insisting that like, nobody, like there never was a serious reader of Tolkien who discovered it through the films. And I'm like, how can you even maintain that? Like, I mean, I know off the top of my head, dozens of people who are like that. So it's like, whatever. It's just, a kind of isolationist elitism, basically.
Ivory tower mentality.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah. So I'm definitely excited to see that. It will be a fun new round of conversations to have.
Yes.
Cool. Okay, well, I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you so much, Corey, for coming on and having a chat with us. And as I've said, a very much open door for you to come back whenever you like. And
sure.
I know that Helen would like to have you on her channel as well. So,
absolutely.
One day when I'm finished with my Numenor stuff, then I'll ask you lots of questions.
Great. Yeah. We'll have we'll have some Numenor discussion.
Helen is the expert on Numenor on YouTube.
Excellent.
So,
excellent.
Well, not self-proclaimed, but I literally am just reading.
I'm proclaiming it, Helen. It's true.
There you go.
Yeah, I love Aldarion and Erendis. I'm reading it for the 4th time this year.
Yes.
Because I want to do a video on it, and I just love it. It's so beautiful.
That is a remarkable story in so many ways.
It
really is. It really is amazing.
Yeah. It's another tragically unfinished one as well.
Tragically unfinished, yeah. That would be on my list. Way below Tuor, but that would be on my list of things that I would like him to finish. Maybe number 5-ish or so on my list of things that I would on my priority list for Tolkien to finish. But yeah, it's his power of writing dialogue is on display, I think, in that story. Every time a character has a speech in that story, I'm completely convinced. Right, Eldarion speaks, and I'm like, oh yeah, he is so right. I totally see his and then Erendis responds, and I'm like, oh, she's right. She's completely right. I totally see her point of view.
Not only that, but the
I don't like her, and
you don't like her. Yeah.
No, I don't like her, and I don't understand her motives because I think she's whatever. We'll discuss that one day.
Yeah, well, we'll get there.
The father, the king, in the story, he reminds me of my dad in some ways. He's a very believable dad character.
Yeah, he is. He is a very believable dad character. No, I really like that too. No, it's a wonderful story. So yeah, we'll get together and talk Numenor sometime.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you anyway for coming on. As I said, I'm going to wrap this up. Helen, I always give my guests an opportunity to plug their stuff. So Helen, what are you working on your channel?
I just finished my I lowered myself and did third age because I only do first and second age. This is what I always, I only do mainly Silmarillion content. But I did voice Galadriel for so many YouTube creators in the past. Her dialogue, the mirror of Galadriel scene, and everybody's, your accent is perfectly fitting for Galadriel or some elf. So I'm voicing that, and I thought I want to do a video about Galadriel and why she was so powerful, like first 8 years of the trees and that stuff, like her backstory and how you can imagine the magic of Galadriel.
Yes.
I just finished that, Dan, so it will drop this weekend on the Clueless Fangirl channel. Yes, that's my name, Corey, because all these Tolkien people always comment you when you say something, and they're like, "Oh no, but it's this way," or "You're mispronouncing this," and I'm like, "People, come on, give me a break." And that's
Tolkien
why
himself wasn't even consistent on pronunciation.
No, he wasn't.
I know.
And you always, the same people come after me. By the way,
I know. They would come. But that's why my channel's name is The Clueless Fangirl.
That's great.
That's great. So don't come at me.
One of the things that has been for me a wonderful part of being part of the internet broadcasting world since I started my podcast, there are so many. I remember my colleagues and my dean back at the college I used to teach at being like, "You shouldn't be doing this podcasting stuff, dealing with the general public. You should be doing peer-reviewed stuff so that you can have your ideas challenged by people who are your intellectual peers." And I'm like,
have you met the internet?
And this is the thing that it was very quickly obvious to me. I'm like, there are so many people that I have met who consider themselves clueless fangirls, who consider themselves amateurs, who know the text really well and have really, really insightful things to say about it. So, so despite your very humble name, I think that's excellent.
But I want to plug Corey's courses because I will take part next year. I have more time. This year was very stressful for me work-wise. But Corey, I'll definitely join Signum University next year.
Excellent.
No, seriously. I always wanted to. I was very, very busy. But I think I can totally do it, wing it next to work, which will be easier next year.
That's great.
Everybody can think about that. And Dan will have all the...
That's great. Yeah, and we have there's several different ways in which people can participate. Like we have of course our master's degree program, which is a serious and rigorous graduate program, and we're very open, to people who, when you do have to have a bachelor's degree, in order to enroll, and it is really serious academic work for people who don't have the space in their lives for taking serious rigorous courses like that towards a degree. That's why I do the public broadcasts that I do, which are free and open to everybody, and you can pop in and out. So I've got my Exploring the Lord of the Rings discussions, which I do every Tuesday. I've got my Mythgard Academy discussions, which is basically like this long-running online book club where we do a Tolkien book every other book. Right now we're doing The Inferno by Dante, and we did Morgoth's Ring, and we'll go back and we'll do The War of the Jewels next, volume 11 of the History of Middle. Well, actually, we may interrupt our schedule to do the new book that's coming out next year.
I was going to ask you about that, actually. The nature of Middle Earth.
Exactly, yeah.
Do you know anything about the content of that? I mean,
I don't.
Only what I've seen in manual.
There's just a short description of flora and fauna of Numenor, and
very, very enticing. But it's exciting because this is the first new material to be released in a long time. I mean, look, Beren Lúthien and the Fall of Gondolin.
Gondolin was the last one.
Children of Huan. All that stuff is great, but that wasn't new. Like we had all that stuff already, right? This new stuff that we don't have. So, oh my god. Anyway, so I'm pretty sure we're going to do that in the Mythgard Academy. So anyway, so I got the Mythgard Academy, I got Exploring the Lord of the Rings, I've got the Silmarillion Film Project, which I do every other Thursday. And then, of course, I do have my Lotro stream on Friday afternoons. So those are my 4 major broadcasts that I do on a weekly or bi-weekly basis that people are welcome to join, and all of that stuff is archived on our YouTube channel. So go to the Signum University YouTube channel and you can find all that content, which is great. You can go and look at the different books that we've studied in the Mythgard Academy and stuff, and just do those. Whether it's Tolkien stuff, we did Unfinished Tales, like we've done now the first 10.
Massive playlist,
yeah, it's a big playlist. It was funny. I just recently did that video for Wired. They asked me to do a Tolkien video on Wired, and so there were a whole bunch of people who've kind of discovered it through that, and so there've been a bunch of people who, like, reached out on Twitter and they've been like, "Wow, I really liked your video. Do you have any more content?" And I'm like, "Oh, make sure you're sitting down. There's several thousand hours of content. I've been doing about 10 hours of content a week for 10 years. So
that Wired video, the recent one, did really well, didn't it? It
did. Yeah, I was
viral.
Yeah, it did. There's about like 850,000 views or something like that. I was surprised, actually, because I've done kind of videos like that before, and it was the first time in a long time that there was like this wave of people kind of treating me like a new thing. It was kind of funny, but but anyway, no, it's that was there's actually there's going to be a sequel to that. There's going to be a part 2 to that one, which probably next year when Amazon things start heating up, I suspect.
Yeah, makes sense.
But there'll be a new one coming out. But anyway, so encourage people. SignumUniversity.org is our webpage for Signum, and the Signum YouTube channel is, of course, where you can find all the back stuff. We have podcast feeds, of course, for all of our different all of my different programming and stuff like that. But you can find all that stuff there too.
Okay, and I will just give one more plug for your stuff as well, Corey, which is you also fundraise for Signum.
Yes.
So I'll have some details in the description of my video on how people can contribute.
Definitely, yeah, and that's not
people. All that he just mentioned is basically for free.
Yes.
There's a lot of work behind that, and we all know that.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And of course, we are trying to really make a new future for higher education at Signum, and a future which is not built on the back of students and student debt. It's one of our core principles. That nobody emerges from Signum with debt. Is one of the things that we strive for. So, and of course, it means that we rely upon the generosity of folks to help to make that happen. So, definitely appreciate any support that can come in that way. No question.
Cool. All right. Well, I think I can hear in the background Queen Beruthiel's spy cats calling on her. So
I'm hungry. I didn't have breakfast. It's 12.
I need to have lunch. Corey needs to get to bed. So
that's true. It's true.
No, Corey will work now for a few hours.
That's right. Yeah. Well, it's almost dawn here, so that means it's almost bedtime for me.
Thank you for doing this.
No problem. No problem.
Thank you very much for doing this, and goodbye, everybody. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.